All right, welcome back to week 6. This week we're talking about language, and in particular we're focusing on linguistic relativism and linguistic determinism. All right, so what is linguistic determinism then? Your book talks about relativism. We'll get back to that in a second. But the larger idea of linguistic determinism is based on the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is also in your textbook, and it's the idea that we cannot think of anything for which we don't have a word, that language defines the boundaries of our thinking. So much so that without a word for something, we can't even think about it. We can see it, but we can't process that thought. We can't not go really beyond just the idea of knowing it exists. Right? You might come up with something in your brain, but until you come up with a word for it, you can't do much with it, such as tell other people about some new invention you made. So the idea of linguistic determinism is a powerful one. Okay, without words for a thing, we can't think about it. Okay. Now, linguistic relativity argues that languages create variations in the ways that cultures perceive the world. So it's a subset of this idea, right? That different people have different languages, and that their languages shape the way they look at the world. Okay, and it's hard to say, which came first, chicken or the egg, the language or the culture. It seems that they work hand in hand to create one another. And Sapir once said that we see and we hear and experience largely as we do because the language of our community predisposes certain choices of interpretation. All right? It's powerful stuff, right? You've probably met people that maybe some of your friends that don't know each other very well, and maybe they're quite different, and they look at the exact same situation and they have two totally different interpretations of it. All right. Now, the way that different cultures view time, for example, is reflected by and constructed through their language. A lot of Americans say, I need to save time, right? We think of time as something that can be saved, right? Not all cultures view time that way, right? Time to many cultures is, it just happens, it just goes on. And for a lot of cultures, time is cyclic. We also have the idea that my time is running out, right? Which is probably based on the idea of the hourglass, right? An idea itself that was probably based on the idea that time was something that you could save and store up. And the idea also that this will never happen again. You won't hear somebody from a culture that views time as being cyclical saying this, because they believe, of course it will. Right? If you watch Battlestar Galactica, which is a new series I'm getting into, I'm watching some of the old ones, or the first season again, that whole idea comes up again and again, that time repeats itself. Right? So that culture is different from ours, right? They see time as being cyclical. All right. Now, if you think about the treaties that were signed between the Europeans and the American Indians, you have to ask yourselves, were these treaties interpreted differently or the same by both parties, right? The Native Americans later said, we wouldn't have dreamed of giving away our land. We didn't know land could be owned. In our culture, in our world, land cannot be owned, right? It just wasn't part of their reality. But for the Europeans, land could definitely be owned and bought. So a lot of people used to joke the American Indians were really stupid because they gave away all this land for some beads. Well, they weren't giving away the land for the beads. They were allowing the Europeans to use the land for the beads. The American Indians thought that they'd still be able to use the land again someday, or negotiate for the land use to themselves in exchange for some beads. They had no idea they were giving away the rights to the land forever. Right? And now we've got New York City. Quite a different reality there. Now I'd like you to think about an example from your own culture, or co-culture if you will, and that reflects a particular view of time, money, love, fun, anything. And think about how those different ways of looking at that concept shape your perceptions and your behavior. And if you think you only have so much time, are you really careful with it? Do you stick to a calendar? Are you that way with money? Right? So just take a moment to think about it. Maybe pause the slideshow for a moment. And a lot of times, the metaphors that we use say a lot about our linguistic determinism, our particular approach to the world through language. Right? When you think about a relationship, do you think about a relationship as a delicate plant that needs to be nurtured? Or do you see it as a relationship, as a tapestry woven by two artists? Or maybe you see it something as totally different. Right? So if you step back and think of what do I think of a relationship as, you'll probably see that it shapes the way you deal and work with that relationship. Now, other phrases that I like to play around with, people talk about turning up their intensity, or that people can cool off, or a situation has gone totally haywire. These are all metaphors that reflect, just see people as like machines that can be cranked up, cooled off. Your wires have all gotten messed up and crossed and cut, maybe. So, what metaphors do you use in your life? Do you think they're empowering or limiting? They're empowering or they're limiting? You've got the power to choose what you're going to do with those metaphors. You know what metaphors you use in your life. All right, and the way that different co-cultures describe their realities is also very telling. Snowboarders describe the snow in a certain way, right? A recluse, somebody who doesn't ever leave their home, would have a totally different description of a snowstorm. And an Inuit, also known as an Eskimo, would describe a snowstorm in a whole other different way, right? Same way when we look at how a land developer or a timber harvester, somebody is looking to turn a forest into hardwood to sell, how differently that they would see the wooded hillside, right? If they were, say, standing next to an Aborigine, somebody that's lived there for generations, right, and sees the trees as a home, right, not as money. Now, there's an author by the name of George Orwell who wrote a book called 1984, and very famous novel, and it's called a dystopic novel because it's of a future that's horrible. And in the text, the government uses language to totally and utterly control its subjects. Right? The idea of linguistic determinism is really well demonstrated in the novel. And one of their primary tools was Newspeak. It's a new language, an entirely new language. They were trying to limit the words people used and therefore limit what they could think about. Right? Here's a funny example. The main character works for a newspaper, and newspapers don't write. Basically, newspapers aren't really about writing current news. They're mostly about fixing old news that's already been published. And the government employs thousands and thousands of people to fix the old newspapers so that they match the new reality, because they're constantly changing the past. They're constantly rewriting the past. And here, you won't even be able to understand it. They write Times 3.12.83, that's the date, by the way, reporting BB day order double plus ungood refs unpersons rewrite full wise upsub anti-filing. Okay, so you're like, what the heck does that mean? Basically, in the Times, that's the newspaper, on the date that they listed, that they reported something. BB stands for Big Brother, and Big Brother references some people that don't exist anymore. The government has disappeared them or killed them off. And it's very important that he go back, the main character go back, and rewrite this story, not referencing these people that aren't alive anymore, and that he submit it to his supervisors prior to filing it to make sure that it works well. Okay, so they've basically taken the idea of being really bad and turned it into double plus ungood. So, they've got the word good, and to make any variation on that, they just add prefixes. Here to say something's really, really bad, they say double plus ungood. If something's really, really good, they just say double plus good. Right? So you can imagine, if people can't think, if they don't have that many words for things, they would have a pretty numb reality inside their brains. Right? When they see a beautiful day, they would just think good, right? As opposed to beautiful or amazing or wonderful. And all those words have their own sort of emotional attachment or connotation. And then the other word is unpersons, right? That's how they refer to people that they've killed. Right? People that no longer exist are unpersons, right? It's a lot easier way to refer to somebody, and it prevents people from thinking about things if you don't use words like killed or disappeared or imprisoned for life. All right, now here is the big idea behind 1984, and it really sums up, I think, linguistic determinism very well. It's basically taking ideas, restructuring or redefining what they mean so that the populace sort of can't think for itself when they think the way the government wants them to. And the three slogans are: war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. And the idea is the people in the text, in the book, see these words everywhere, and they start to believe them. So, everyone loves peace, so to have peace, you got to have war. Oh, great. Everyone loves freedom. To have freedom, well, you got to be enslaved. Awesome. And then to be strong, you need to be ignorant. So you don't need to know anything. It's okay to be enslaved, and it's okay to constantly be in war. And that's the culture of 1984. Fascinating book. I encourage you to read it. And there are a lot of other good examples that demonstrate the ideas of linguistic determinism. You might check out a film called What the Bleep Do We Know? It's a philosophical and you could argue spiritual film or documentary that was quite popular a few years ago. Very interesting take on how reality is constructed through language. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this week's slideshow, and I hope your semester is going well. Take care.